Get some insight on a host of these foreign policy issues with Florida Republican Senator and member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Marco Rubio. He joins us from Miami. Senator, thanks for being here. First, I want to get your thoughts on what came out of the administration today and what you believe is happening with the Iran nuclear deal.
Well, first, I think Secretary Tillerson's comments today are on point, and that is that the problem with the Iran deal is not whether or not they're complying, but the fact that it's a bad deal. The purpose of the deal was to prevent a nuclear Iran, to kind of prevent what we now see in North Korea. And the fact is that this deal that was constructed by the Obama administration allows them to basically keep in place all the infrastructure they need to become a nuclear power, to become a nuclear weapons power. You're delaying the inevitable in some way by putting this deal in place. I actually think there are some issues about how much heavy water are they producing and the like that are, in fact, in my opinion, violations of the deal. But even if they were complying, they're complying with a flawed deal that ultimately allows them to retain all the infrastructure they need to one day ramp up, and over a period of time will actually allow them to do it legally under the terms of the deal.
So this letter that was sent to Speaker Paul Ryan from the Secretary of State that said essentially that Iran is meeting the terms of this joint nuclear deal, is that simply an admission that it's tough to get out of?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think it's a formality. In essence, what the letter basically says is, according to this deal and the conditions of this deal, we cannot confirm or verify any violations. If you read beyond it, though, and the Secretary Tillerson's statements today make clear, the deal itself is a bad deal. Even if they're meeting the conditions of the deal, it doesn't solve our problem. Our problem is not to get Iran to comply with the deal. Our problem is the deal itself and the fact that it allows them to retain for example, the ability to enrich uranium to the point to weapons grade eventually. They retain all of that capacity. Meanwhile, they continue to build out their long-range missile capacity, their conventional capabilities, their irregular and asymmetrical forces like their support of Hezbollah. And what the deal allows them to do is allows them to have more economic activity and revenue to fund all of this.
I guess my question is, candidate Donald Trump and actually candidate Marco Rubio both said on the campaign trail that this is a disastrous deal and should be ripped up, essentially dismantled on day one, or something to that extent. Now is what,
and that's
reality?
How I still feel. No. I still feel that. In fact, we should say that was a deal that was made by a previous administration. It is not legally binding. It was never submitted to the Congress for approval. It's not a treaty. It is a political agreement with the previous administration. There is now a new administration. Here are the steps that we want to see. And if these steps are not met, and that includes, I would include the sponsorship of terrorism and the construction and development of long-range missiles, not to mention lowering their enrichment capability, if not eliminating it altogether. If what they really want is nuclear energy, they don't need enrichment capability to do that. There are multiple countries around the world that have nuclear energy and do not have enrichment capability.
And you think the administration is where you are?
I hope that they are, and that's what they had said on the campaign. And obviously it takes some time to get to the proper position, and perhaps they're working it in different angles. But ultimately, everything I expect the president to do everything he said on the campaign, and this is one of them.
Okay, let's turn to Venezuela. As you look at these protests and the video all around Venezuela, specifically Caracas, your thoughts as you look at the people there suffering. The GDP is down 14%, inflation's up 482%, 87% of Venezuelans say they don't have enough money to buy food. 3/4 of the population lost an average of 18 pounds of food. The stats are pretty remarkable as you look at the protests.
Well, one of the things you notice is that their president, Maduro, still has a big gut. People might be starving in the street, but Maduro's not starving. That's one of the first things you notice. He hasn't lost any weight over the last few years of this suffering. Beyond it, I would say people have to understand what's happening there is not a coup. It's not people in the street trying to overthrow the government. They're basically asking for the government to follow the Constitution. For example, the opposition won a majority in their legislative body. Despite the efforts of the Maduro government to steal the election, Maduro's basically just canceled them. He doesn't pay them. They don't get paid. He refused to allow the Treasury to pay the legislative branch. They have no budget for things like paper and ink and printers and the like. Beyond that, his Supreme Court has ruled that their laws are null and void. They can pass any law they want. They don't count. So that's the first thing that's happened. Then he suspended elections. All the regional elections were suspended. And so what's happened there is the cancellation of democracy. In essence, a coup d'etat on behalf of the government itself has canceled democracy. And what I'm asking for, and have been pressing the administration to do, and they've begun to do, is to ask our allies at the Organization of American States to convene these hearings that the Organization of American States is asking for, and invoke the Democratic Charter and say that democracy in Venezuela no longer exists, and they must meet these conditions or they will be expelled. That may sound like diplomatic talk, but it actually is the one thing that Venezuela has been most sensitive to. They do not want to be ostracized. They do not want to be isolated in the Western Hemisphere by fellow Latin American countries. And that's where I think, in addition to some of the sanctions against individuals, that we should begin to focus the attention of our foreign policy. And
the Trump administration so far has not done that. But do you, for someone sitting at home, what does this mean to the U.S., the turmoil there? Well, to be fair, they have. Our representative at the OAS has in fact taken that position. I can tell you that General McMaster at the National Security Council has actively worked to get countries to agree on voting in that direction. And why does it matter? Well, I'll tell you, in my state of Florida, number one, all this uncertainty in Venezuela hurts our economy. There was a lot of business between Florida and Venezuela, from real estate to services, that has vanished. And the other is an uptick in asylum requests. When people in Venezuela face these challenges, they want to come to America. Again, it's not that we don't want people here. We have a great Venezuelan community, but they would rather live in their own country as well. So it puts migratory pressure. It's a destabilizing force in the region. It is a country whose vice president was allegedly selling visas to up to 10,000 suspected members of elements like Hezbollah, passports, Venezuelan passports being given to people that were members of Hezbollah allegedly and the like, criminal enterprise that they were running, support for the FARC guerrillas in Colombia. It's a destabilizing force in the region. It creates migratory pressure on the United States, and it really undermines the economy of states like Florida. And I just want to hit what you just mentioned, and that is some 10,000 visas that Venezuela apparently gave to all kinds of people from the Middle East. Correct. And are we sure that that's accurate, and what level of Homeland Security threat is that? Well, that allegation came forward from a former individual in that office, came to my office. I have forwarded it to the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security. I know they're looking into it, but the allegation is a pretty strong one and in many ways well documented, and that is that there were these individuals from the Middle East that were getting Venezuelan passports. And so someone from the Middle East would get a passport with from Venezuela claiming to be a Venezuelan citizen. And that means individuals could potentially be traveling to multiple places, including the United States, under a false identity provided by a government agency. That is the allegation, and it's specifically directed at the current vice president of Venezuela, who, by the way, has been sanctioned by the Trump administration and had lost his condos and his private jet and all sorts of holdings here in the United States as a result. Senator Rubio, we appreciate your time, and we will follow up on that story and others. Thank you.